Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Glad to have this man back. It's Robert Greenway, Director at Allison Center for National Security at Heritage, also former Deputy Assistant to the President, former NSC Senior Director, and a whole lot more. Robert, good to see you. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to have you on, my friend. Sadly, it's the one-year anniversary since that surprise attack, massacre against civilians and some military in Israel from Hamas. It was, nobody expected it. In fact, I think you and I have talked about this. Israel probably was lulled to sleep a little bit, thinking that, the Palestinians really do want peace. There's no sort of uprising. And then all of a sudden, here we are. Just reflect on this being a year-long conflict now, this continuation of the conflict from 1948 or whatever it was. Where are we right now? If you were to analyze it just in a sentence or two, where are we in this thing that was launched last year?
Well, so I'd say two things. First is that we're on a steadily increasing trend of escalation. Each new act is higher risk than the one that preceded it, and there's no end in sight. And as long as that's true, we can expect greater turbulence going forward and higher risk, certainly, as we do. And second, and you hit upon it, is that not only were the Israelis surprised, but so were we. 32 Americans were killed. We didn't anticipate this. And in many ways, we blinded ourselves by deprioritizing Palestinian terrorist groups in the new administration, the Biden-Harris administration. And so we didn't anticipate it either. And unless we correct that deficiency, we're going to be blind again, and especially since we've opened up the southern border and who knows who's infiltrated.
It's Robert Greenway. We appreciate the time and the access. You know what I can't figure out, and I know that asking you to get into the mindset of a bad guy, a terrorist, is hard, but I wonder if you can make me understand what it is Hamas thought they were going to achieve. They knew they weren't going to end Israel that day. They knew they wouldn't just take over the country or blow it off the map between the river and the sea. What do they hope to accomplish? Just kill as many Jews as possible and then go home and celebrate? I don't get it.
Well, you're probably not the only one. I'd look at it three ways. First, rank and file Hamas members and too many individuals in Gaza that participated, supported, and were part of the attacks on October the 7th. I think were seeking revenge, and they were also following instructions that they thought was not going to lead to the ultimate destruction of their organization. At the leadership level, at Sinwar's level, at Haniya's level, I think that they were looking to goad Israel into a response for which they would obtain political and fiscal advantage. And they thought that they had an opportunity to do this with the United States placing constraints upon Israel. At the most important level, I think Iran set all of this in motion to distract from their nuclear program and to take advantage of the opportunity where the United States and Israel were not seeing things through the same lens. And so they thought that the United States would constrain Israel and put them in a position of advantage. Ultimately, weakening Israel was the goal.
So if you're an insane terrorist, they thought that they would kill 1,250 innocent people, and that somehow would goad Israel into responding, and the world would think Israel was the bad guy? Help me understand that.
Yeah, well, it doesn't make sense to sentient individuals like yourself
right.
and nor me. But look, a lot of people in the world have turned against Israel. There are European countries. France was the most recent with Macron asking for an arms embargo against Israel. And there are members of the Senate and the House, all Democrats, that are calling for an arms embargo against Israel as well. So not an insane idea from their practical standpoint. Obviously, it did not transpire exactly as they meant, but Israel has, up to this point, been placed at a position of disadvantage, and the United States has not been fully supported. At the same time, though, the destruction on Hamas and on Hezbollah now has been higher than I think that they anticipated.
Director at Allison Center for National Security at Heritage, it's Robert Greenway. Yeah, let's talk about that. The numbers that we've been getting out of Gaza and out of anybody who is Hamas or even Hezbollah, the numbers that we've been getting are from their news agencies. The terrorist news agency says Israel killed 40,000 civilians or whatever. It turns out today, and I can't cite the story, and I'll make sure that I do it on my show after the interview, but I saw a story today that said 80% of all of those that Israel has killed were either active Hamas or their families. Have you seen that?
I have, and I think that that's accurate.
So we take the numbers from Hamas, who's the bad guy that launched the attack. We take the numbers from Hezbollah, who are the bad guys who want Israel off the map as well. And people like France, as you just illuminated, are going, oh my God, the civilian casualties, it's crazy, it's disproportionate, you got to stop. And then they're all saying the word ceasefire. Robert, ceasefire doesn't work. Ceasefire doesn't mean victory. Ceasefire doesn't mean Hamas will never do it again. Ceasefire means they got away with it, Israel retaliated, then they all just go on their merry way. How does the talk of ceasefire from our highest levels of government here, all the way through governments of Europe that you just highlighted, how does that make any sense? How does that end this?
Well, look, those decisions, I think, are being made for crass political benefit inside their own country. So Macron in France and also the Biden-Harris administration coming up to a presidential election are making a political calculation that is certainly not designed to provide Israel an advantage in this. And again, I think that's why this conflict was initiated to begin with. They thought that they could count on the United States and this administration in particular and others in Europe to make common cause for them, to allow them to survive, to allow them continue to benefit financially and to perpetuate this conflict. And you're exactly right that a ceasefire does nothing more than ensure that this will happen again. And that's why total victory has to be the goal. And I think Israel's chosen the right course. I only wish that we would support them fully.
Can total victory happen? Because I would like that. You would like that. I think anybody who's a good person who doesn't want terrorism next door trying to kill you, they would want a total victory. But I don't even know what that looks like. Can you go in and take out Hamas and then reprogram the Palestinians that voted Hamas in? What does total victory look like?
Well, in this circumstance, I think the answer is yes. I think you can achieve total victory. And in my judgment, that's the destruction of Hamas, or in this case, Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, as a viable organization to threaten Israel. In terms of re-educating the populace, that's a generational struggle. That is a much more different calculation. But in my judgment, total victory is necessary. It is achievable, and it's the destruction of the capacity to threaten Israel again. I think it can be done. I think it has to be done.
Heritage.org is the website. When we talk about reprogramming or doing something generationally, it's about telling people every single thing you've been told your entire life is a lie and it's wrong. It's like reprogramming the Hitler Youth. You can do it, but as you said, it takes a long time. So what do you do as far as management or government in Gaza? Let's say Israel gets total victory that you and I want, and the good guys should win, in my opinion. Those watching and listening probably agree. So how do you do that? Does Israel go in and govern Gaza until it's peaceful again? You can't just leave it alone because they're going to build up the same exact serpent. I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, so there are two answers to that question. One is where you don't have the cooperation of the neighboring countries within the region. You don't have the cooperation of the countries that have successfully run programs like this to re-educate those in their own countries and those that have come from abroad and assimilated within. And there are many countries in the region that have successfully done this, and they manage their own population accordingly. If you don't have their cooperation, you end up having to manage that process yourself. If Israel has to occupy and manage the security situation in Gaza to prevent a re-attack, it's hard to say re-education is going to take place. The only way to get the cooperation of those other countries that have successfully done it, who want to participate in it, is to address their principal threat, because they're facing one too, and it's from Iran. So without cooperation on Iran, the source of all of this, you can't get the cooperation from the other partners and allies. And that's what the Biden-Harris administration has failed to figure out.
Robert, you know what I noticed, and I'm sure you have as well? Jordan and Egypt aren't stepping into saying, we'll take Gaza, we'll fix it. I noticed that Jordan and Egypt don't want any part of that. In fact, Egypt blocks off the passageway from Gaza to Egypt. They don't let anybody in. And I think the king of Jordan said not one Palestinian will come here. So if they were to step up, I know this is hypothetical, but if they were to step up and say, we'll go in and we'll manage Gaza, we're going to bring some peace to the region, would that be a good, some sort of a good solution or not?
Well, I would think you want regional partners involved. Egypt and Jordan both.
But they don't want any part of it. They don't want any part of Palestine or would be Palestine.
Well, they don't under the current circumstances because it's all negative and no positive. Again, you have to change the ledger and help them address their internal and external security requirements, which if you confront Iran and provide support and assistance to them, we could. And in the past, we've done so. This administration is choosing not to. And so you can't get cooperation from the other states. I would say the Abraham Accord member countries want to participate in the solution to this. They want to re-educate the population and provide prosperity and economic opportunities. but they're unable to do so because no one is helping them address the internal or the external security threats that largely come from Iran.
Director at Allison Center for National Security at Heritage, it is Robert Greenway. We always appreciate the time and the access. What message does it send the world, do you think, Robert, when Kamala Harris says and Joe Biden mumbles, we think that Israel should be able to defend itself and the Palestinians should have a path to their own self-determination? What message does that send the world that we're not saying Israel good, Hamas bad?
The message they're sending is you can ignore our statements and our platitudes entirely. They're not realistic. They're not practical. They're an excuse ultimately for taking concrete action. The region wants honesty. The region wants realism. They want practical solutions to the problems. They don't want the platitudes that have led to 4 decades of destruction in the region. And I think that they'll get that if we can get a second Trump administration. They're obviously not getting that for the Biden-Harris administration. And every time Secretary Blinken goes into the region, the exact opposite of what he asked for happens.
Yeah. It's stunning to me. This is all to try to win an election. But what's interesting, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, and it's Robert Greenway. Go and follow him everywhere. You've got the Muslim mayor of Hamtramck, Michigan, who you would think would vote for those who are not solidly behind Israel. He's endorsing Donald Trump. What do you make of that when you've got people on the Islam side and people on the Jewish side sounding like they're both going to pull the lever for Trump? What is that?
Well, I think you got 2 things happening at the same time. One is you've got a diverse group of Muslims from across the world settled in the United States. They don't all have exactly the same perspective.
Right.
But one thing they all can agree on is they don't want conflict. They prefer peace. In many cases, they're fleeing conflict. Their family members are subject to it. They don't want to see it, and they think the prospects for peace are greater under President Trump, and clearly the facts would support that conclusion. At the same time, you've also got another domestic constituency in the United States that is anxious about our policies and those of the Biden-Harris administration and don't see a path forward. And so they've managed to actually find and alienate both sides of the spectrum here, not providing a resolution to either. So trying to narrowly navigate this politically by polling has actually prevented them from getting the support of either of their constituencies.
What a great answer. Could Harris and Biden shut off the money to Iran today if they wanted to?
Yes, it would take more than a day, but they absolutely can and should make the decision to do so. No question. They just met in Qatar and agreed to release the $6 billion they agreed to provide in escrow last year in September. And that's going to them a week after the largest ballistic missile attack against Israel in the region. It's insane.
Iran must think we're just the dumbest people on the planet. They really must. Now, Trump, he did it when he was in office. You can cut the money off. You can starve them. You can make them only truly get food and water and necessities and not let them fund and finance terrorism. Should he get back in, I hope to God he does, what does he do day one? How does he say that's it, enough? Stop.
The first is we've got to enforce the sanctions that are currently there. So that's starving them of oil export revenue from their major customers, which include China first and foremost. Second, we've got to adjust the market to resupply that demand so we don't have a massive disruption that costs American taxpayers. Second is we have to approach our partners and allies in the region, provide them the capabilities that they've requested and paid for to defend their interest and ours together. And then third is we've got to confront Iran's nuclear program that now is at threshold, the closest that it's ever been. If we don't address that, then we're going to cede control of the region and all of its energy and 25% of the world's global trade to the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, which is unacceptable.
Follow him over on X. Go to heritage.org to find out more about Robert Greenway. Tell me about Project Esther. It's a national strategy to try to get rid of anti-Semitism here. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so in the like everyone else, after October the 7th, it became clear that anti-Semitism was a growing problem in the United States that was escaping all bounds. And that 200% increase we've seen affects Americans, not just Jewish Americans, but really the fabric of our entire society. And so what Heritage and 58 other organizations did was establish a task force. And now we've just published a strategy for private organizations that are part of it to engage in a broad campaign to really destroy the infrastructure that is supporting and sustaining anti-Semitic behavior, violence on campuses and elsewhere within the United States. That infrastructure is visible, it is vital to the organization and its violence, and it is vulnerable to disruption. And our hope is we'll be able to coordinate effort in order to starve that, to be able to really see a change.
How do people find out more about Project Esther?
They can go to the Heritage website and download the plan, and the link to the website, the Anti-Semitism Task Force website, is also available.
All right, go to heritage.org and find out more about that. While I have you, you're a national security expert. Is our national security reliant on us sending $200 billion to Ukraine or not?
I would say no. I would say we have probably sent more than we needed to. It's about a year of our Army or a year of our Navy's budget, and we've done so without strategy. Ultimately, I think President Trump's statement of getting this war to conflict termination is essential. I don't know that we need to sustain the conflict to do that. I think we can apply sufficient economic and military pressure against Putin to bring about favorable negotiation, and I think that should be the goal. The longer this goes on, the more expensive it is, the higher the cost, not just in dollars, but in equipment, but also in human lives. It's got to stop.
Well, I mean, without a doubt, it's got to stop. And let's be honest, most people watching and listening don't know where Ukraine is. It's not a cut down. We just don't have to know where every place is. Why we're involved in that conflict at all is confusing to most. But what people don't understand is that the provinces, the areas, the Donbass, whatever it is, that we're fighting over here all speak Russian. Many of those who live there want to be part of Russia. I'm not on Russia's side here. What he did was horrible. Putin's a bad guy. I am anti-Putin, who, by the way, is endorsing Harris. But you've got to sit down and negotiate. They could have with Minsk too. They could have with Istanbul. They decided not to. It's as if Biden and Harris wanted this expenditure. I don't know if they thought it would help the economy or what it was. In your heart of hearts, why do you think that we didn't sit down? Boris Johnson walks away from peace talks a year and a half ago. Why didn't we come to a peaceful solution before all this bloodshed?
Look, I think the default explanation sometimes is incompetence. And I think with this administration, I think their foreign policy is explained only by incompetence. And so I don't think that they have it within them to formulate a path forward or a strategy for Ukraine in order to get to conflict termination. And while we all want to see Putin, who started this unnecessary military incursion into a neighbor, go away and end as quickly as possible, we've seen no appetite to develop a plan to do so. And absent that, this will go on interminably.
Well, yeah, hopefully we can talk about that again as we get closer to the election. It's Robert Greenway, the director at the Allison Center for National Security at Heritage. Go to heritage.org, find out more about Project Esther to stop anti-Semitism. And thanks so much for your incredible knowledge again today, Robert. I appreciate you.
It's a great pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me, Joe.
All right, brother. We're back after this. Stay right here.